Welcome once again to Doing Business in the USA, featuring Blue Link with Frank Levene and powered by Black Country Chamber member events. I'd like first of all to introduce you to Corin Crane, our CEO, who will provide some open remarks. Corin, if I can just hand over to you, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Richard, and welcome everyone for joining us this afternoon. And like Frank said, it's a beautiful day out there. So once it's over, you can go outside and get a bottle of cider and sit in the garden for a little while, hopefully. And summer's almost here. Look, thanks very much for joining this afternoon. Chambers of commerce have existed in the Midlands now for over 200 years. And West Midlands chambers have been doing international trade together for around about a quarter century, around about 25 years. You look at the West Midlands and the makeup of what makes us so incredible as an area, and it's all about trade, isn't it? It's all about our products and our services that we sell all over the world. So within the chamber network, we do the Department of International Trade contracts, and some of you might have worked with our DIT advisors. We do export documentation and chamber customs. We do overseas visits and trade shows. And we do loads of training and audits for people and support them through their trade. Now, the six chambers in the West Midlands, we work very closely together. Obviously, the Black Country is the best of all of those six and the most organised and has the best value offer. But we support an incredible array of businesses and sectors, as you can imagine, and that's what makes the West Midlands so phenomenal, isn't it? If you think about the West Midlands, right up in, for the food and drink and the cider industry, for instance, over in Hereford, all the way through to the dairy products and the light manufacturing that takes place in Shropshire, the incredible potted industries and the makers who are based over in Staffordshire, the automotive industry in Coventry, which is just, is famous throughout the world, the jewelry and textiles of Birmingham, and the planes, trains and the food and drink businesses, the Black Country. If a country needs it, we make it in the West Midlands sometime, and that's what makes us so fantastic. But what a time it is to trade at the moment. We have these incredible products, these incredible services, but it's an equally tough time to get them out to market at the moment. There's been so many changes over the last few years. Brexit has come and it's gone, and the frustrations and the benefits of that will pan out for years. But those ideas around what quotas and tariffs means now, you need some specialist support sometimes. Understanding what those new trade deals look like. We're doing a load of work at the moment supporting the steel industry, who are trying to make sense of the global steel market with fluctuating prices, with quotas and tariffs, with stuff being stuck out at sea, not getting to port somewhere. How they trade is very complex, but they've got good products they need to get out to market. There's a shortage of drivers. Logistics is a big problem. And if you're shipping, trying to get the best deal through shipping and costs around logistics and globally is a very difficult time at the moment. How do you do that? What's the best way of looking at that? You need some advice on that. There are big gaps in raw materials and microprocessors. So when you want to make your products in the UK and sell them abroad, how you import and get them out again is a real big deal for us. And the war in Ukraine, beyond the absolutely incredibly sad human story that's taking place there at the moment and unfolding in our eyes, businesses across the country are still needing to trade right through that region at the moment. And we've got really good examples of businesses who've got products who have been developed, they've been half paid for, they've been built, and they can't ship them overseas at the moment. We've got customers in Moscow or in Ukraine that they aren't getting paid for. So big discussions around about currency and around about insurance and the dreaded force majeure issues for insurance and about what you can and can't get your money back for is a big deal. And that's why events like today are so important. And you are blessed with some incredible experts on this call who can support you, not only about the issues you might face, but about the opportunities. Because believe me, there are opportunities out there for the goods and the services that you are doing at the moment. And we want to make sure the world knows about the fantastic things that we make in the UK and in the West Midlands. And that's where we are today, because the markets don't really get much bigger than the US, do they? The US is the UK's largest export market for goods and services. And I think, could be wrong, around about 20% of all UK exports go to the US. Hope I haven't just made that up. And based on GDP, it's the biggest and largest economy in the world. You know, the demand for UK services and products is huge in America. It's English speaking, we understand the dollar, there's great connections there, but it's not easy always. And you need experts around this table today to help you with that. So look, thank you all very much. Thanks for asking me to come along. Please make the most of today. Ask questions, share your successes, share your frustrations. Make sure you use the experts on this line the best that you can. And more importantly, ideally, beyond this call today, try and stay in contact with people, with us at the chamber, other people on the call, because, you know, working together as a network is often the best way to get trade done. So thank you very, very much for today. Everybody, please enjoy the call. And Frank, thank you for the invite to come and speak today.
You're very welcome, Corin. Thank you very much. That was a very inspirational setting of the stage. Thank you very much, Corin. We are very blessed all to be together today. It's a very unusual webinar in so much as we've got so many chambers under one roof together. Not only yourself, as obviously the Black Country is a very important element, but Shropshire, Coventry, and Warwick, as well as Staffordshire. So we're very, very blessed. We've got a lovely consortium of constituent pieces to share this event today and to make it valued across the board. So without more ado, let's talk a little bit about the US. The focus is not so much about exports from my perspective, but more about how do you make an investment soundly and in a way that is going to be sustainable and successful in the United States. So next slide, please. Next slide. So the central element of all this is that profit from the expert knowledge around the table. If you're going to look at a US expansion, work with expertise, work with the experts, lawyers, accountants, people who understand the location terribly well, understand the IP issues, understand these immigration issues, understand the major building blocks, how to actually get it done right and in a way that doesn't position you for a disappointment in some stage, because you've done put together some of the pieces in a way that doesn't necessarily hold together for the long haul, because you've not worked with experts who can really guide you. And this is what we're trying to do today, is bring the experts together to help you through that investment journey from the UK into the United States, which is our largest destination for investors, has been for a generation and will continues to be the most important investment platform in the globe for the United Kingdom, as indeed the US invests more here than any other country in the globe. So between the back and forth, it's a very significant transatlantic relationship. Next slide, please. I'm going to breeze through these because some of them are quite self-evident, but the reality is don't get stuck on stereotypes. Don't imagine that the States is homogeneous. It's a very culturally diverse and a very eclectic marketplace, eclectic culture, eclectic country. Each state is different unto itself. We'll touch on that in a moment or two, but don't get drawn into generalizations about what the US is. Do your homework, talk to the experts again, go and visit yourself, get immersed in the States, understand the differences between Indiana and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, for example. They'll be highlighted in a short while, and they're both great states to invest in, but they're different in their own ways and have their own particular appeals. So let's go to the next slide, please. The facts. Next slide, please. It's a big country, highly diversified economy, 21 trillion GDP, 1 million Brits work for American companies, 1 million Americans work for UK companies in the States. It's a very significant marketplace in the world, and it's a very significant one for the UK. Next slide, please. The sheer size of it, it's a big place, 400 million people, just under 10 million square miles. The next slide rather exemplifies how big it is compared to where we are. If you drop the United Kingdom into the US, you'd hardly hear the splash. The state of Oregon is about the same size, a little more than the UK, just under 100,000 square miles. UK is 94, but you can see that the rest of the United States, it dwarfs to the United Kingdom. We are no bigger than Oregon in terms of landmass, and there are 50 states, not just one. So please move on. Next slide, please. As I was saying in the introduction, don't get waylaid by generalizations or stereotypes. It is a very distinctive marketplace in terms of the regionality. Each region has its own particular flavor and appeals and and the sorts of industries that are prevailing and doing very well. It varies, and the historic legacies of different industries are vary by market, by region. So New England is very different from the South. The West Coast is again different from the Midwest, and we'll hear more about that in a moment from both Richard and Steve in a jiffy or two. So think regional, don't think national, because you can't bite off all of it at one go. It's a big marketplace. Next slide, please. Each state has its own government, each state has its own constitution, and indeed, each state is further divided into counties that have their own laws and regulations. So, number one rule of thumb, make sure you talk to a lawyer. Tom will be talking to you shortly, as indeed will Carnegie and Simon, but absolutely talk to Tom at the very beginning. He has a very broad-based corporate law firm. It offers a whole plethora of wonderful services. So get legal advice, because the legal system in the States is not uncomplicated, and to get off on the right foot is quite material. Next slide, please. This is again a sort of a pen picture of where all the major cities are, and again they're all famous in their own right. New York, obviously, and Boston, Washington, Miami, and so on, all around the coast of the United States. Well, this is where the largest cities are. Chicago, of course, in the Midwest. But again, don't be necessarily, and again, this will come out later with the other presentations, don't be overly swayed by being drawn to the big cities. They're expensive. There's a lot of competition for the talent. And you may be better off seeking a second tier location, which is closer to the talent. It still gives you wonderful access to the talent pool, allows you to put in place a much more cost-effective entry strategy because it's not so expensive. And you may be near your supply chain. If you're on the Eastern Seaboard, or not, certainly from the Chicago eastward, you're much easier to get in and out of the States, and the time zone difference is not so significant as going, say, from Houston westwards. Next slide, please. One of my favorite slides. I live in Jacksonville. I have a home in Jacksonville. It never ceases to amaze me how different it is from the top to the bottom of the I-95. But there is 150 miles to the west of the Atlantic Ocean, and you've got close to a third of the US economy, the GDP is in that neighborhood. And again, very, very different. New York is very different from Miami, as you'd imagine. Next slide, please. This is rather, I've used this slide for some time, but it still stands the test of time. These are the industries. If you're in these industries at home in the UK, and I'm not saying others are not interesting. Energy, oil and gas, of course, naturally, ICT, life sciences and healthcare, business and financial services, aerospace, advanced engineering, creative industries, consumer goods and e-commerce. These are the hotspots in terms of the economy, the United States economy, as indeed they are here to a large degree. I know that Steve and Richard will talk about those shortly, how they're relevant in their own particular states. Next slide, please. Many ways to go into the US with a distribution partner, distributor, an agent, own your own office with the JV partner staff in tow, own office with your own staff. Each of these distribution channels, each of these entry strategies need to be thought through carefully, and we can give you advice on all of that when you get into the weeds of it. But again, there's not one road to Rome. There are many roads to Rome, and there are many ways to enter the US market, but each has its own particular pros and cons in terms of the sustainability, and indeed whether it actually is bringing to you the right sort of access to the market with regards to the customer base and the sustainability of that access. Next slide, please. The thing I love about the States, and I suppose I've traveled around a lot in my own career, I've enjoyed international greatly, but I've also enjoyed the States because it's in its own way, it's a real melting pot. Europe's a melting pot, no doubt about it, but there's no channel between the different states. You can go from one end of the state to the other. And I mentioned I live in Jacksonville. I always used to amuse. I'd been working in Miami on a secondment for a while, and I put the radio on in Miami, and I'd be listening to Latino jazz for a bit, and then as soon as I got closer to that would fade out, I'd get to Orlando, and you'd get to rock. And further north, all in the same state, the radio station would be principally dominated by country and western. And then as you got to the border of Georgia, it was gospel music. So It's each state has its own particular variations, but again, North and the South are much more. Your language is different. They speak English, but again, you can get tripped up on the language. Be sensitized to the business attire. It's very much open for doing business. Very strong on networking. We were doing a virtual networking session today, but very, very much the order of doing business is meeting people and networking. It's a crucial part of the US business culture, as indeed is the appreciation of the salesmanship that goes into selling a product or a service. They're not perhaps as a little bit sniffy we can be in the UK, but they're not. They really appreciate selling the salesmanship and having the conviction to put your best foot forward when it comes to communicating your products and services value. Next slide, please. Some simple sort of things to bear in mind. Make sure you invoice in dollars. Show everything in dollars, not in sterling. Paper size is different. Your business cards have to be a little bit different. It's metric versus imperial. Have a business address, which is a US business address. US telephone number, do .com, not .co.uk. And you may find that having stock and inventory fulfillment capabilities in the States will help you internationalize your business, that you look like you're more American if you've got inventory on the ground. And these other elements, if you tick as many of these as you can, you're seen to be an American doing business in the American way, and you'll be more credibility and more a sense that you're actually committed to the market if you've got these features in place as you face the marketplace and face potential customers. Next slide, please. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder. We've got some new friends on this call, John and Mike. They'll be talking about sales tax in a short while, but again, people in every state have different. There are different tax structures, sales tax structures, and how can your presence affect and a draw nexus and sales tax liabilities in the different states is an important element to understand. We've got expertise on the panel today to talk to that. But again, it's something you should underestimate getting your head around it. Next slide, please. The presence of unions. I mean, it's not something to be intimidated by. We just know that there are unions in some parts of the states, but in other parts of the states, not the case. And just under 11% the last time I looked had union membership of the entire workforce. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that this is the states they call it right to work. The unions are not. There's no forced unionism, so the labour laws are a little more liberal. And I would say you can hire and let go people with more ease. Not that's a driving factor, but it's something just to know that what you're dealing with in terms of HR regulations and labour law by a different state. Next slide, please. So what does the roadmap look like? I mean, here I'm just laying out a dozen or so individual steps. They're not in any particular sequence. They're just laid out to help you, but certainly these are the major building blocks. Do your homework, do the market research, do a deep dive on location evaluation and selection. You've got great friends here around the table in Steve and Rich who can help you with their two particular states, but there are other states that may come to mind that you may want to have a look at, and we're here to help you. Creating a legal entity is actually number one, and Tom will talk about the legal ramifications of how you do that and the type of structure that is best served. Tax planning with a US entity and why. Visa immigration support, how to navigate the visa immigration world. Again, Carnegie will talk to that. Opening a bank account, you need to have an entity set up and an FEIN set up, and then a bank can be opened up for, a bank account can be opened up for. Tom is very adroit at this. And recruiting your employees, again, there are no one on this particular panel session, but we can certainly give you help on all of the following elements, including accounting, marketing and branding. We have experts in our sort of virtual team that can certainly be brought to bear if you have any questions outside of this particular panel's level of expertise. But it gives you sort of a snapshot of the roadmap you need to keep in mind. There are other elements like insurance we haven't touched on in this map that are important. Next slide, please. So there's a picture. I'm afraid to say I was a little bit younger there. That's grey hair. The next slide, please. And you can find me in the UK. I have a base in the US. We're incorporated in the States as well as in Hampshire. But I'm at your disposal, and it gives me great pleasure to hand on the baton from what I was trying to make a mission possible from what may have seemed to be a mission impossible. Let's just set the stage for Steve now to talk about the wonderful state of Indiana. Steve Bridges, my pleasure to hand over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Frank. Could I have the first slide, please? Indiana, a state that works. You'll find this across the US. They love to have snappy little titles. But some interesting comments that we've had already from Corin and Frank, and if I could just sort of build on a couple of them. It's what I call the 5 L's, if you're thinking about establishing in the United States. Can I have the next slide, please? So location. It's like buying a house in the UK. You know, what are the 3 golden rules? Location, location, location. So it is for setting up a business in the United States. Frank's already alluded to it. Don't get blinded by the shiny baubles of New York, Boston, LA, San Francisco. There may be very, very good reasons why you would want to be there, but it's a little bit like making the comparison between Coventry and London. Coventry, the center of the auto sector in the United Kingdom, talented workforce, ecosystem that supports it, supply chain, customers, etc., etc. London, yeah, London is the equivalent of New York. So it is a big state. I should have said at the outset that I was formerly in another life. I was a British diplomat, and my last job working for the British government was as the consul general, sort of the mini ambassador in the Midwest USA, based in Chicago. And you're going to hear from a very good friend of mine, Tom Torelli, in a minute. Tom and I knew each other from my Chicago days. And I remember a telephone call once from a minister in London who asked me to go to Miami for the following morning, and I was in Chicago. And I said, well, I don't think that's going to be possible. And he said, well, you know, can you not just pop in the car and drive? And I said, well, yes, Minister, but it's a little bit like driving from London to Moscow, which is obviously, you know, not overly pertinent at the moment, but it is a huge place. And if New York has attractions to you market-wise, if you're in the financial services space or law firms or whatever, then yeah, absolutely New York. But you don't have to have your business headquarters. You don't have to be based in New York to work in New York. So yes, there's 50 states and they all have a degree of independence. But you know, you could establish yourself in Indiana and still operate into New York, into San Fran, into LA. So think about the ease of doing business, the cost of doing business, and what really matters to your business. So for Indiana, why Indiana? Well, it's one of the logistical centers of the United States. It's in what's called the Midwest. The Midwest covers, depending on definition, 12 to 14 states. But as the Black Country and your area was to the United Kingdom, so the Midwest was for the US. It was called the Rust Belt. It was where the economy of the United States was generated. It was the home of the big business. 1 in 3 Fortune 500 companies are still headquartered and based in the Midwest USA. Indiana is a big logistical hub. Frank showed you I-95, which is that motorway that goes down the east coast of the United States. At the top of this little diagram is I-80, I-90, which is the east-west equivalent. Again, if you're looking at a business where road transportation and logistical movements, third-party logistics companies, etc., if this is what your business is about, the Midwest is a very important area. And my colleague and friend Richard Kilner will tell you about Pennsylvania in a minute. Again, it's on that spine that goes west to east, and your transportation links are very, very important. Check on the airports that you have in the various states to make sure that you can get to where you have to. Look at the rail links. And again, for Indiana, it's no coincidence that FedEx has their second biggest facility anywhere in the world based in Indiana. Next slide, please. So I mentioned early on, look at cost, look at ease of doing business. Tom will tell you how quickly you can set up a company in the United States. It doesn't have to be Delaware. Delaware is the most common, and you'll hear Tom will explain. But one of the major reasons is that a lot of venture capital and private equity entities are very familiar with the governance structures of a Delaware incorporated company. But in Indiana, it can take you a week and it'll cost you $1,500 or $2,000 to set up a company. Indiana is very competitive in terms of tax. Again, you will hear this as a common refrain, but do check on the tax positions of whichever states you're looking at setting your businesses up. Next, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thanks. So again, internationally, the UK employs 37,500 people in Indiana. Some of our biggest investors, Rolls-Royce, no coincidence that aerospace, advanced engineering, advanced manufacturing, auto, these are pivots for the Indiana economy. Japan, again, you can imagine where most of those workforce are located. They're in Subaru, who have their biggest facility in the United States, in Indiana. Subaru's headquarters is in Lafayette, Indiana. Toyota, Honda. Indiana is the second largest producers of automobiles in the United States, behind Michigan. But what sets it apart from Detroit is Ford, it's Fiat Chrysler, it's GM. Indiana is very much more international, and of course, the relationship with Silverstone and the racing world because of the Indianapolis Speedway. So motorsport is a very big subset of the advanced engineering space. Next slide, please. And here again, looking at Rolls-Royce. So in aviation, Rolls-Royce, GE, Northrop Grumman, all of the big names you would expect. British Aerospace have their largest manufacturing facility in the United States, in Indiana. So if you're in the space of advanced engineering and manufacturing, you're likely to have customers that are either directly linked to an Indiana-based company or is one removed. Cummins Engines, headquartered in Indiana. So our universities, our schools have a very, very strong engineering bias. It isn't just engineering, agriculture, for obvious reasons. You're in the Midwest, you're in the corn belt, the soy belt of the United States, but agri-tech, life sciences is also very strong in the United States, in Indiana, and some of the largest US entities are based in Indiana. Zimmer and a whole orthopedic ecosystem evolved in the north of Indiana up towards the Chicago border. Next slide, please. You'll hear just about every state in the United States will tell you that they've got the best universities. When it comes to engineering, Indiana is right up there with a lot of those that perhaps are a little bit more familiar to you on the East Coast. The difference with Boston and perhaps going further down on the East Coast into Washington, D.C. is the engineering colleges and the universities in Indiana are about churning out engineers rather than just the R&D side of things. Purdue University, that little P that you see on the right-hand side of that slide, Purdue is recognized to be one of the major engineering schools anywhere in the world. It specializes in aerospace, aviation engineering, aviation technologies. But you'll have heard of Notre Dame, or as the Americans call it, Notre Dame. That too is an Indiana university. And so a lot of the educative system, especially tertiary and vocational training, is geared towards the industries that strengthen the Indiana economy. Next slide, please. Money. If you're looking to set up in the United States, you will need finance. And it's not always straightforward. Yes, there's debt finance, but without a strong revenue stream and without a strong economic and business history in the United States, debt is not always easy. Indiana recognizes this, and as again part of the ease of doing business and the welcome that you get into Indiana for your company. We have two public-private partnerships, Elevate Ventures and Next Level Indiana, which are funds that mainly looking at seed finance. But again, look at your capital requirements and think about how are you going to meet those. Next slide, please. Also, again, public-private partnerships I mentioned just now. There are a variety, there's a whole ecosystem across the state in Indiana that looks at our core economic drivers. So we've got agro and bioscience, we've got life sciences, advanced manufacturing, we've got energy, and we've got technology. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Silicon Valley story. Silicon Valley is now extremely expensive if you're early on in your business development in the United States. And what happened? There was a spawning of new hubs. Austin, Texas came as the first, but Austin is beginning to max itself out a little bit, and then came level 3, then came the third wave, if you will, and Indianapolis is part of that third wave, as is Atlanta, Georgia, etc., etc. There are plenty others out there. We recognize this. We recognize that companies that are not overly familiar with the United States, they might need some help, soft landing, helping to get into the ecosystem, to look at the expansion of their customer base, etc., etc. So in Indiana, we have this ecosystem. It's called the CICP, the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership Scheme. Next slide, please. I mentioned just now the sort of the confluence of technology, of aerospace, or automotive, just as you do in the Midlands. So Indiana has its Battery Innovation Center. We're actually looking at trying to link the UK's Battery Innovation Center with Indiana so that we can cross-fertilize and look at joint and collaborative research entities. But it's just an example of where Indiana is going in the innovation and automotive space. Next slide, please. And cost. I mentioned it at the outset, and I'll kind of try and wrap up with it. There is a cost of living, and there is a cost of doing business index in the United States. If you can check it out, it's pretty easy to find online. 100 is the natural binary index midpoint, the median. And my advice to you would be look at a number under 100. Indiana is, I think, in last count was something like the 15th least expensive. Our index is 95.3. This covers mean hourly wages, and it covers a lot of the tax positions, your utility costs, etc., etc. There are wild differentials between the cost of doing business in the United States. So it does, as Frank wisely said, you need to do your research. By all means, reach out to me and any of the other economic development offices across the United States, and they will help you to navigate this. Obviously, they're going to try and say, well, my state is cheaper than the others, but ask for what that cost of living index, what is that number, and that will steer you, and you'll quickly realize that I think New York is something like about 117. Hawaii is the most expensive, but that's for different reasons. Next slide, please. So that's just about it. Just to recap, the 5 L's, I mentioned it at the outset. So location, logistics, which we've covered. Think about your supply chains, think about your customers, think about getting your products across the United States. Look at 3PL system. Labor, look at the talent supply. Most of the states in the United States that you're probably going to be looking at will have an excellent ecosystem of universities, but look at those that specialize in what you do. And if you're in the manufacturing and engineering space, you could do far, far worse than looking at Indiana. Look at your legals. Tom Torelli and other partners on this webinar today are going to talk to you about IP, about immigration, about setting up companies. And finally, language. We may be 2 nations divided by common language, but that division can get a little bit wider sometimes. You have to be very careful on the precision of language. I'm sorry to all those that have heard me do this, but we use the word scheme in the UK. I've got a new business scheme. I've got a scheme that'll help us do this. A scheme in the US, think Ponzi scheme. That's what a scheme means. It means something that is underneath the line of legality, and you will put you will put potential partners, potential customers off in a heartbeat. And once you lose them, you'll find it difficult to get them back. Americans like to deal with American-based entities, and that's why thinking about setting up your business is so important. It is the most important market in the world for the UK. Corin mentioned it's #1 for exports. The UK is the largest foreign investor in the United States, and the United States is the largest foreign investor in the United Kingdom. But if you're really to succeed, you're going to need a base. So think about setting yourself up there. There are a variety of ways of doing it, everything from a rep office all the way through to an HQ. And just about every state that I know, and Indiana is no different, will have a welcoming package of tax incentives and other incentives to soften the financial load if you choose their state. So thank you very much. I will stick my email in the chat. If any of you would like to reach out, please, no such thing as a dumb question. It doesn't have to be Indiana specific. As I said, I worked for the British government for 4 years, promoting UK-US economic and political partnerships. I've done that in the private sector as well. In total, about 7 years working with companies like yours to strengthen their positions in the US. So please do reach out, and I'll be willing to help you in any way I can. Thank you very much, Frank. Back to you.
Thanks, Steve. Perhaps building on your alliteration, I can add Levene with an L. Love your presentation. 2 more L's for you. Thank you very much, Steve. Tom, the floor is yours. We're very fortunate to have Tom with us today. Tom is the senior partner of Torelli & Associates and a long-standing, well-established law practice in Chicago. It works all over the States. And again, I know Tom is very active at the moment, looking at a number of acquisitions that are going on through his practice. But I just thought it might be an interesting way of looking at the US entry. Organic growth through starting from the bottom up is always there. We talked about that a bit as in the preamble, but acquisition could be another route to market rather than organic growth. But again, Tom has a full bag of competencies in his practice and could cover pretty much everything from A to Z. So over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thank you, Corin, and thank you, Richard, for trusting Frank to bring somebody like me in on the event today. Hopefully I will do you proud and be of some value to your members. There's no way for me in 15 minutes to answer legal questions or provide you with the kind of guidance that you're going to need. I'm happy to spend up to an hour for free on a Zoom call or a Teams call with each of the companies that are participating today to answer your specific questions and provide you with more direct advice as to how I see you might be able to minimize your risk when doing business in the United States. It's been a formula that's worked for our firm for 35 years, and my intention is to keep the ball moving in that direction. We've enjoyed a very close working relationship with the Department of International Trade for over 15 years, through which I got to know Frank and a number of chambers of commerce as well. And I'm in the Birmingham area. Well, we'll be in the Birmingham area next week, as a matter of fact, meeting with companies. So both Stephen and Frank and Corin have all mentioned how important it is to be in the United States. And from all these years of experience, it's pretty clear that long-term, you've got to think about being present in the United States, namely having boots on the ground in the US, perhaps through your own company, likely, but at least having someone that is pounding the pavement in the United States to make things happen for you. And because relying on partners in the United States exclusively generally does okay initially, but over time, your partners have other priorities, and sooner or later you'll realize that, gosh, our sales in the Netherlands are substantially higher than they are in the United States. There's something wrong with this picture. So have that in mind. As I usually say when I give these speeches, but usually it's a little later than I am now, if you want to be clear as to who it is who's going to be responsible for your long-term success in the United States, it's really easy. Go to the mirror. That's the person who's going to be the most responsible for your success long-term in the United States. relying on partners or even your own employees in the United States is very difficult to at least get the ball moving so that you can be successful long-term. So who is Torelli & Associates? We're a small firm. We're 5 lawyers working here in Chicago. As Frank mentioned, we've got clients all over the United States. What we do is we try to help our small to medium-sized foreign clients, which is all we work with, minimize their exposure to legal risk when they do business in the U.S. And that relates to the following 5 areas. 1, intellectual property. Most of our clients being small to medium-sized, they need to distinguish themselves from their competitors quickly and easily. Often enough, that's with technology. It is at least based on them having their own trademarks and their own image and identity in the United States. So almost invariably, we get involved in registering trademarks, copyrights, protecting confidential information, patents. One of our lawyers is a registered patent lawyer. Then contracts. I like to work with our clients from a strategic standpoint, namely, where are we today? What do we know about our potential partner in the United States? Have we insisted on a business plan from them? What kind of budget do we have? Where do we want to be in 2 years, in 5 years? Maybe we want to make ourselves big and beautiful looking for a possible, for being a possible target for a third party to buy us. We'll also touch a little bit on acquisitions. We've never been involved in so many acquisitions as we have been over the last year. That the pandemic may have something to do with that. I think also PE ratios are substantially lower in the United States than they are in other markets, which has resulted in US companies being much more attractive. We're in a generational shift. All the baby boomers are getting old. Their kids aren't interested in taking on their businesses. And as a result, there are a lot of potential acquisitions that may be available. I might as well talk about it now. It can speed your entry into the US market, especially if your potential target has got a network of customers or distributors or agents for that matter. That is normally the main reason why our clients buy US companies. Sometimes it's complementary technology, et cetera, but often enough it's to speed entry on the US market. And the cost, sometimes you can buy companies very inexpensively for under $1 million. And you might think, well, that's still a heck of a lot of money, but it's really not a lot of money if you can gain access to employees that you can trust and that are well known in the marketplace, the distribution network, et cetera, et cetera. Most of the acquisitions we do are somewhere between $3 and $10 million. There are some tremendous opportunities for that in the United States. At the same time, you really don't know the target very well until the acquisition has been consummated. So it's crucial that you do full due diligence, namely get all of the information concerning the history of the company, any potential skeletons in the closet, tax issues. We are not a tax firm ourselves. The tax fellows can speak to that later on today, but it's very important to get a full view of your potential target in the United States. And then finally, what oftentimes causes acquisitions to not be successful is the issue of culture. That the priorities, your priorities differ from the people that you are inheriting when you buy the company. Efforts are not made to integrate. Steve mentioned some of the cultural differences. I'm going to tell you one that you'll probably all recognize right now. Americans are very enthusiastic. Yes, we can. Boy, your technology is the best thing since sliced bread. We'd love to be your partner, all that kind of good stuff. It means nothing, okay? It means absolutely nothing. The only way to know whether somebody's serious is to ask them for a business plan or a marketing plan. How are we going to work together, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of people doing business in the US or acquiring companies in the US don't watch their P's and Q's and get covenants not to compete from the sellers, or tie down their new employees with employment agreements that also include covenants not to compete that are enforceable in the state where they are working. There are lots of things that can be done in order to protect your flank as you enter the US, whether it be through acquisition, direct greenfield setup, or working online in the US, or through agents and distributors. So intellectual property, contracts, setting up companies. Stephen, Frank have both spoken about the ideas behind setting up a company in the United States. There are lots of reasons to consider setting up a US company. In my view, the most important one is really credibility. As Steve mentioned, I'm going to rely on Steve a lot here, because he's smart and he knows, and he's been here and he knows what he's doing. The Americans prefer doing business with Americans. Don't hesitate to wave the Union Jack when you do business in the US, because Americans love the UK. However, we still want to do business with an American company and pay an American supplier if we can. And as a result, that's, to me, a really valuable reason to consider setting up a US company. And what we're talking about, setting up the company, having all of the books and records in order, having a federal tax identification number, and being ready to do business will cost you no more than $2,500 if you were to use us, for example. So it's not about the cost. And if, for example, $2,500 is a lot of money for you, I think you know the answer to the funny face I just gave you. The US market is probably not for you at this stage, because it's going to take time and money in order for you to be successful. Another reason to consider setting up a US company is to minimize your exposure to liability risk. Some of you, and indeed it's at least half of those companies that I speak with these days that are like yours, don't make their stuff. Their stuff is made in India, in China, Turkey, or elsewhere. And as a result, here's the idea. Set up a US company and have the US company buy directly from these third country suppliers. In that way, your UK company is not involved in the transaction. And if you structure it properly, perhaps with a supply agreement between your US company and the third country supplier, whereby the third country supplier assumes the liability risk if there are any product defects or quality issues with what they've produced, you can very effectively protect the UK company from liability risk. And some of you may have products and technologies that are more susceptible to claims than others. So that's another reason. Immigration strategy. Carnegie will be talking about immigration strategy here shortly, and we did a session together the other day, and his presentation is absolutely outstanding. So get ready for that. But one of the things that's very clear, and we offer immigration services as well, but what's important to understand is that the key sponsor of a visa to live and work in the United States is your American company or an American company. And if it's not your American company, it dramatically limits the number of visas that may be available, if any. And as a result, what you need to do is to have a US company that's up and running, not just created, because if all it took to get a visa to live and work in the United States was having a US company, we wouldn't have any immigration laws. People would just set up companies and say, hey, I'm coming to work for my company. Well, it's not that simple, and you'll hear about that. So if your long-term plans include having your people from the UK living and working in the United States, you got to set up the US company lickety-split. As Frank mentioned, we can help you set up a bank account. Once the US company is incorporated, we can help you set up a bank account in a matter of days without the signers having to be present. You may talk to your bank and they say, oh, no, that's no problem. We'll be happy to get that arranged for you. And they won't. You'll spend a couple of months and then finally you realize, daggone it, we do have to be present in the United States. Why? Because there's a thing called the Patriot Act that has big banks, especially under the government's microscope. The bank that I have cultivated a relationship over the last 25 years with is happy because they trust me, because I've been doing this forever, that if we set up the company, our clients are not engaged in money laundering, and therefore they will open up the bank account within a matter of days. So I'm covering each one of these issues. I'm not just talking about our firm here. So intellectual property, contracts, setting up companies, immigration. I'm going to skip that issue for now. An issue called product liability preventive management. That's on this list as well. What steps can be taken today to minimize your exposure to product liability risk? Namely, going through all of your media, your US dedicated website, and you better have a US dedicated website, because Americans don't understand how to spell color properly, or flavor, or lots of other words. So you really should have a US dedicated website, because we are the most important country in the world. I mean, you already know that, don't you? All right, maybe we're not, but we should think of ourselves as being the most important country in the world. And it's important for you to have that in mind when you're dealing with Americans. But this product liability preventive management is going through all of your media, your instructions, your warning labels, your limited warranty, your disclaimers, your what do we call it? Limitations of liability, all that kind of stuff. We go through those and then provide you with comments and recommendations so that you have a defensible position in the event that a claim is ever made in the future. I'm going to wrap things up here in a minute. One of the things that's really important for you to consider is the importance of contracts. Europeans seem to think often enough that, hey, sure, we'll have a contract, but it's really about our relationship. And if we have a problem, we'll be able to solve it. Americans don't really look at it that way. If you have a problem with your American partner, you'll get on the phone and try to solve it, or on a Zoom or Teams. The American, if they have a problem with you, they're going to first look at the contract. They're going to know what their rights are. And then they'll give you a call. They may not talk about the contract, but boy, are they going to know what those terms are. And so it's really, really important that you have a written contract with whatever partners you're working with in the United States. Don't be, quote, smart and say, well, we don't know where we're going with these partners, so we're not going to have a contract to start with to maintain flexibility. You may maintain flexibility. You might be asking for trouble because you do have a contract. It happens to be an oral contract, and obviously you have your interpretation and the American partner has their interpretation. And often enough, when there's a dispute in the offing, it's because you have different interpretations of what your relationship is. The best way to protect yourselves in your relationship with your American partners is to take the bull by the horns and prepare the first draft of whatever contract you have, and have your American lawyer, whether it be us or one of the other 850 or 900,000 lawyers that we have in the United States, prepare the contract, have your lawyer do it. Last thing is, take advantage of this hour of free time. I believe that the organizers are distributing our email coordinates. You see that mine here on this one slide that you've been provided. We offer fixed fees for setting up companies, for doing trademark searches, for preparing trademark applications, drafts of contracts, etc. That's one of the reasons why I think the DIT and a number of chambers have enjoyed working with us over the years. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you, Frank.
Well, thank you, Tom. That was, as always, brilliant. Thank you so much. Very enlightening, and again, gives everyone a huge amount of insight about how important legal advice is and having a good lawyer on your side. And Tom, you're that man. So thank you very much for that time again with us. Appreciated it. I'd like to go to the next module, if I may, and introduce Richard Kilner, who's the MD for UK and Ireland for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the lovely city of Philadelphia within that footprint. Richard and I worked together for a number of years, and Richard will, I'm sure, do a stellar job at explaining why the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is such a wonderful place to consider making that US investment. So over to you, Richard, if I may. Hello?
Grab your mute button there, Richard.
Right. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can, Richard. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you, Frank, and thank you to the West Midlands Chambers for the opportunity to engage today. Special thanks to the Staffordshire Chamber, since I was a Staffordshire resident for 8 years and love my time in the West Midlands. Steve did a great job on outlining the assistance that US states and state economic development agencies can offer to UK companies. So I'll go straight to the commercial here, and this is Pennsylvania's value proposition. Location, infrastructure, workforce, cost of doing business. We are very competitive in the Northeast. Could we have the next slide, please? Yeah, the thing that puts us on the map for UK investors is the map. Very much an Eastern Seaboard state. The Port of Philadelphia is the 5th largest port on the Eastern Seaboard. We're a big state, 12 million population, 6 million workforce, 2 major centers. Pittsburgh is in the southwest corner of the state, and Philadelphia, as Frank has pointed out, in the southeast corner. That's less than 70 miles from New York City, and our operating cost structures are half those of New York City. If you want to rent some space, Class A space in Philadelphia, it's going to cost you $28 a square foot per annum. Manhattan, it's 70. In Boston, it's the mid-50s, and in DC, it's the mid-40s. So we're highly competitive, and we're right on that Boston, New York, Washington corridor. Connectivity to the UK is great. We've got direct flights from Manchester. I know the Staffordshire guys use Manchester over Heathrow and Gatwick. Direct flights from Gatwick and Heathrow, and BA have put on a daily direct flight now to Pittsburgh from Heathrow Airport. I've taken it on a Friday. It's a terrific flight. So, oh, by the way, in terms of the Port of Philadelphia, several major container ports. Felixstowe has the direct link, and our Port Authority are very helpful in helping UK companies establish their first beachhead by finding good 3PL contacts at no cost. Next slide, please. So our competitive clusters: life sciences, high tech, broadly defined, advanced manufacturing and materials, particularly metals. I'd like to point out powdered metals at that point because our biggest Midlands investor is GKN, and GKN have the majority of the world-class powdered metals cluster in Pennsylvania. We have a very good relationship with those guys, and look forward to some of their expansions very shortly. And finally, business services, creative industries, digital ICT. Pittsburgh is a major center there, the first university to get an artificial intelligence degree course, and is the #1 ranked computer science undergraduate program in the United States. Next slide, please. So yeah, those are coming up. Yeah, life sciences, major sector. We're the #1 pharmaceutical manufacturing state in the US. We're 3rd in life sciences with 33,000 life science companies. Philadelphia is particularly strong in gene therapies, drug discovery, and major pharma. You see some of the UK companies that have taken advantage of late, from the Oxfordshire Science Park, Adaptimmune, PSI Oxus, Immunicore, and Vernalis from the Thames Valley, all headquartered now for the US in the greater Philadelphia region. Next slide, please. Yeah, very much a knowledge-based economy. We've moved from old Rust Belt standard industries to additive and additive manufacturing, robotics, artificial intelligence. At the Pittsburgh Airport, there is now an additive manufacturing dedicated technology center and technology park, which is combining the strengths of the the powder metals and the sintered metals technologies with the additive manufacturing programs. Next slide, please. Advanced manufacturing. One of the points we've got Morgan Advanced Materials here, GK and Shell. Shell have just put in a $7 billion ethane cracker facility in Western Pennsylvania, based on the shale gas, which is fully available across Pennsylvania. We're sitting on the second largest shale gas field on the planet, which is producing some of the cheapest gas, natural gas, anywhere in the world right now. So for any industries that are energy intensive, and particularly in the current world context, and the Russian situation is a major boon. Shell are actually producing through that ethane cracker some of the cheapest raw materials for polymers and plastics and pharmaceuticals anywhere in the United States right now. Next slide, please. Creative industries, we have Comcast headquartered for the US in Philadelphia. They have a special accelerator program and incubator program for companies coming in to take advantage of connections with their technologies. We have several incubators. The University of Pennsylvania, which is our major Ivy League university in Philadelphia, has 2 soft landing international incubators, which are tax-free programs. They offer tax-free programs for companies coming in. 0 Pennsylvania income tax, 0 Pennsylvania property taxes, and 0 taxes on sales tax on inputs. Next slide, please. So the UK is the largest investor in Pennsylvania. Over 1,000 companies are UK owned. A staggering number, 25% are actually manufacturing operations. When you consider GDP, the percentage of GDP in the UK, which is manufacturing, which I think is less than 12%, that's a very high figure and really does consolidate our appeal as a manufacturing state. Our recent successes on major manufacturing include Rain Kitchens. They're going to employ 1,000 people in Northeast Pennsylvania at their manufacturing facility, which they're building a 1 million square foot plant. They've already leased 250,000 square feet and employed 500 to date. Smith & Nephew have just opened their research center, their research center for the entire US for robotics in Pittsburgh. Surgical robotics. Pittsburgh is famous for its agile robotics, and this is a real opportunity to actually engage. So could I have the next slide, please? So our programs to assist, Tom talked about acquisitions and joint venture partner identification. We run a dedicated service as a state using our regional partners, chambers of commerce, manufacturers associations, anyone who knows companies personally. Tom gave the good example of the president of the company whose son is not going to take over the business and therefore it's up for sale. We can identify also those off-market acquisition opportunities, particularly the mid-size. Joint venture, contract manufacture. We've done quite a number of contract manufacturing projects for UK companies. Most recently, a company down in the Southwest that manufactures flood defense equipment. They're bidding for the project for the whole of Manhattan. And they have partnered with a company in Johnstown, Pennsylvania to manufacture and help distribute and market the product. That's going to be a very big operation. Our best incentive program is our Keystone Opportunity Zone. We're known as the Keystone State because of our location. We have 125 manufacturing zones right across the state where up to 10-year abatements or complete tax holidays are given across all Pennsylvania state taxes. Machinery and equipment loans, we have soft loans at way below market rates for machinery and equipment, and also for land and building in if you're looking to construct or acquire a facility in the state. Our manufacturing rental rates and construction rates are extremely affordable, probably the cheapest in the Northeast, and we'd be very happy to set up a schedule that matches any of your requirements. So with that, I'll conclude on to the last slide, which are my contact details. We're working, as Tom is, we're working with a number of Birmingham and West Midlands based companies right now, and happy to add in any other companies on this call that may be interested in a meeting to discuss their projects. So with that, thank you very much to the chambers, and thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Richard. That was great, and thank you for making a very fascinating and tantalizing contrast with Indiana. Very interesting how you juxtaposition the two states. Lots of the folks to think about. So I know you're both available, you and Steve, to talk about your locations. That was really very good, as always. It gives me great pleasure to bridge to the next presentation. Avalara, we haven't worked before together, John Chisholm and Michael Sankey, and they'll be talking about tax compliance done right, with a particular focus on sales tax. But it gives me great pleasure to introduce them. And of course, I think we've got Kai in the background, who's the marketing manager, listening in as an observer. So thank you for making it possible, Kai. And John and Michael, the stage is yours, Mike. Over to you. I think John's going to be talking, am I not mistaken? Hello? I think we seem to have a technical glitch here. Richard, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think we might have a problem with our two gentlemen. Are you on the call? Is Michael not there?
Can you
Hello?
hear me?
Sorry? Are you there, John? And there we are. John, I've introduced you. The floor is yours if you want to start off with the first slide.
Okay, Frank, let me just double check. Make sure we dropped out. He's just come back. Actually, somebody just come back in, so there may be some difficulties somewhere.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Maybe just a moment, and I'll
find them. Because you can always skip on to Simon and come back if needs be, you know.
Bear with me just a moment. I'm just sending you a message.
Yeah, I'm here, guys. Can you hear me?
Okay, brilliant.
John, I did introduce you, but I know you're going to be focusing on tax compliance done right.
Yes.
And then you're a global company, global enterprise with many thousands of employees, but you've got a base in Brighton and another base in London, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, in Gresham Street. But John, I did introduce you, so if you would like to carry on from there, we'd be very pleased to hear what you have to say, my friend.
Yes, perfect. And I apologise. I've turned my video, so I would normally be here with you, but if it's the internet connection, I've just turned that off so it makes it better and more stable. Yes, my name's John Chiswell, and I'm a cross-border solutions manager with Avalara. I have my colleague Michael Sankey supporting me today as well, tax solutions manager. Michael and I help businesses of all sizes with their global expansion. We support businesses by providing cloud-based tax calculations, as well as registrations and return services for sales taxes. The purpose of the presentation today is to give you a bit of a whirlwind overview of US sales tax in around 10 minutes. So it will be fairly high level. And the areas that we'll cover comprise US sales tax, what it is, what can trigger it, and finally how Avalara can support you with it. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So while that's popping through in the background there, you can see that we operate globally and have a vast amount of experience in global taxation. We help businesses of all sizes to achieve compliance, reduce risk, and streamline their processes. If we move through to the next slide here, this is broken down to further outline just our company details. So we've been in operation for 15 years. We have a comprehensive automated cloud-based suite of solutions that are fast, accurate, and easy to use. We offer more than 1,000 pre-built connectors into leading accounting, ERP, e-commerce, and marketplaces and other business applications. And each year we process billions of indirect tax transactions and file hundreds of thousands of tax documents and tax returns globally. We specialize in building trust, educating, and helping companies to navigate the complexity of compliance in the US, whilst automating and streamlining the entire processes. We've got offices across the US, our EMEA headquarters based in Brighton, and further locations in India, Germany, Belgium, and Brazil. So if we move to the next slide, please. Do I have to collect US sales tax, or do I have Nexus? This is the big question. A lot of companies will be looking to expand into the US, or will already have done so, but they might not be aware of their obligations. You can see here from the second paragraph in this slide, Nexus is defined as a connection or business presence in a state or jurisdiction. If you have Nexus in a state, obviously there you say you need to collect and remit sales tax according to their regulation. If we move on to the next slide, we'll see what triggers that Nexus. So first off, we have a physical presence. This physical presence in a state, such as a bricks and mortar location, creates an obligation to collect and remit sales tax within that state. Physical presence also includes renting or owning property, employing remote workers, or even storing property in a fulfillment center or location owned by someone else. And the second is storing inventory in third-party warehouses, such as Amazon or other places like that. You may be required to register in states, as they can deem this again as a physical presence. And then remote employees, installations and salespeople traveling in certain states. People can be a really big asset for a business, but they can trigger sales tax nexus in more jurisdictions. So independent contractors, traveling representatives, and I think the fourth point is even trade show attendance can establish nexus in some states. Now, a major reason which is not listed here is your economic activity. So a bit of a legal point, but on June the 21st, 2018, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in favor of the South Dakota versus Wayfair. The ruling basically allowed the state to begin taxing remote sales via their economic nexus laws. Since the ruling, more than 40 states have enacted economic nexus laws of their own. Prior to this, states could only enforce a tax collection on businesses that had a physical presence in the state, such as a bricks and mortar location or remote employees. While the physical presence standard still exists, nexus laws were expanded to include a sales tax obligation based on a certain level of economic activity within the state, including sales revenue, transaction volume, or a combination of both. And like many sales tax laws, economic nexus criteria can vary by state and by the type of tax. So I think we've already gone on to slide 6 here. How complex is US sales tax? And the answer is very. You can see here for items on the left, which in the state of New York are taxable, compared to items on the right, which are non-taxable. So a perfect example here, you have second line shower caps, which are taxable, but swim caps aren't taxable. In the same way that walking boots are taxable, but hiking boots are not. Really highlights there the need for a business to be certain of their obligations when they're shipping to the US market. It says we've got 14,000 jurisdictions with varying rules and requirements. I think it's actually more like 16,000 now. But trying to manage this aspect of your global expansion in-house can be quite a daunting task. So if we move through to the next slide, hopefully we can sort of some ways that Avalara can support you with this rather than trying to manage this in-house. Okay, keep on. There we go. So first we have a Nexus study. Avalara can provide businesses with a Nexus study, which is a detailed questionnaire exploring your current US business. And after this, we can provide a state-by-state written analysis of your obligations and a full breakdown of the results. We can then provide a detailed, tailored solution from Avalara, aligning our resources to support you with this. And the next slide outlines our sales tax risk assessment. So in addition to our Nexus study, we can provide you with a detailed risk assessment in conjunction with our special services team. This is an in-depth analysis of your business. We would provide you with a 60+ page overview of the findings and our recommendations. We can then support you with registrations in each state. And we can offer cloud-based, real-time, accurate tax calculations for your US sales. This is one of the key parts. It's not featured too much here because 10 minutes time, we're trying to keep this slim, but whilst we're looking at sort of your registrations and your risk assessment here, we can provide you with that live calculation of sales taxes connected to your e-commerce platform. So you could have checkout based live calculations of sales tax and duties. So your customers can see real time what they're due to pay. If we flip through there, I think we've got a few points left on this slide.
John, I ought to add you've got 15 minutes. You don't need to sprint too much, my friend.
No, it's okay. I think we've tried to cram it in. So
okay, I don't want you to feel under pressure.
No, don't worry about it. I'm just saying. So moving the next slide, we move on to some examples of Avalara customers. Yeah, some of our European customer base. We work with some major household brand names, as you can see here. There's some big, well-known companies listed there. We have a very broad customer base, ranging from retail customers primarily, but also healthcare, logistics, all the way through to manufacturing products as well. And pretty much whatever the product shipped, we are able to provide support in getting it to the end user, whether that be with regards to what your obligations are for that product or the calculation of the duty and taxes when you're faced with that getting to the product of the customer. And there, I'd like to say thanks for listening. I hope you found that presentation useful, and I'll pass that back over.
Thanks, John. That was really great. We haven't worked with you before, but it really was very, very pleasing to see. Again, it just reaffirms the importance of talking to experts. I mean, I don't want the folks to feel a bit daunted when they're looking at the States as a US entry opportunity, but working with the folks around the table, including your good selves, we can all together collectively de-risk any of the entry plans that folks are looking to put to bed by working with experts and keeping on the right track, getting on the right track at the beginning, keeping out of trouble. So this is no different. So thank you very much, John. Thank you very much.
No problem. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, well, I'd like to move on now to Simon. Appleyard Lees are another extraordinary practice. They cover everything from artificial intelligence, genome engineering. But Simon's got a wealth of experience, and Appleyard Lees have got offices in Manchester, Cambridge, and Halifax in the UK. But Simon travels a lot and is very familiar with the United States, having also lived and worked there. But Simon, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Frank. I hope you can all hear me, and thank you very much to the Chamber for asking me to speak today. So if you could advance to the next slide, please, Frank. So first off, a little bit of my background. I'm a partner at Appleyard Lees. We specialise in patents and trademarks, but also other forms of intellectual property. As Frank said, I used to work for a US company, so I actually used to work for Kraft Foods for my sins, and I pretty much split my time between the US and the UK. It wasn't intentional, but that's kind of how it panned out. But I was in charge of patent teams in both the US and in Europe. So I've seen, obtaining IP protection in the US for a European business or a UK business, and I continue to do a lot of international work with predominantly a lot of my clients coming from the US, and also a lot of my European clients wanting protection in the US. Talking about different types of intellectual property in the US, it pretty much falls down to 4 different types. What we would call a utility patent, which is what people would typically consider and understand to be a patent, which is something which is protecting a concept or an actual widget or a device. Design patents are directed towards protecting how something looks, so the overall appearance. Trademarks protect the actual words or trade names, and lastly, copyright would protect literary works and other works such as logos, etc. Next slide, please, Frank. So I think when you're looking at what your IP strategy should be in the US, I think you need to look at what your business strategy is going to be in the US. So what sort of business are you offering? Are you going to be simply a service provider? In which case, are you really looking at wanting to protect your trademark and having like a first mover advantage? Is it a product? What are you going to do? How are you going to manufacture the product? How are you going to sell the product? Is it going to be manufactured in-house? Is it going to be in the UK, maybe China, or is it going to be over in the US? Are you going to manufacture? You're going to have that contracted out to a third party? Are you going to sell direct to the end consumer, or are you going to ship it to an intermediary or a distributor in the US? Lastly, maybe you're looking to license rather than get your hands dirty with actually going through the distribution route or manufacturing and selling yourself directly in the US. And lastly, a business model which is probably more popular in the US than it is over here is a franchise, where you have a business and you're pretty much copying and pasting not just the logo but also the products and the product offering. You also need to think about what is your long-term strategy. Do you want to set up shop in the US and for that business to be a sustainable business, or are you looking for maybe a sale or an asset sale within about 5 years? A number of my clients are fairly early stage startups, and they're obviously looking at maybe a flotation. They do look at floating on the London Stock Exchange, but there seems to be more of an appetite for risk and also a bit more liquidity in the US. So sometimes they're looking at maybe a NASDAQ filing in order to try and raise more capital. Next slide, please, Frank. So thinking about
confession, so I'm not actually in control of the slides. It's actually Richard doing the honors.
Sorry, Richard. Thank you, Richard. I should say.
I didn't want to take the credit when I wasn't actually.
That's fine. That's fine. So thinking about patents, what is your technology and what's your product offering? So it could be a platform technology which has a particular, which can cover a number of different applications and markets. Could actually be a narrowly defined product where it's a very specific product. You know what you want to protect, and it's going to be fairly narrow patent filing. Are there going to be any modifications and improvements? If there are, these could be incorporated in follow-on patent filings. In the US, there's what's called continuation applications and continuation in part applications, where you can essentially bolt on additional modifications to the original patent filing. But really what you want to be doing is trying to get some patent protection in the US where it can't be easily copied. For services that you might provide in the US, tends to be a little bit harder to protect via patents. If you're going to be keeping the technology in-house, then you might want to go down the trade secret route. Alternatively, if the technology will be in a device or it's going to be on a database that's going to be in the US, then you might want to file a patent application for that. Lastly, low technology or new emerging business models. Really, you're looking at the sort of first mover advantage. It's probably unlikely that you're going to go down the patent route, but you might be maybe more heavily skewed towards the trademarks and designs. Next slide, please. So talking about utility patents, this really protects how a product works or features of how the product actually works. And patents can cover products, processes and methods, software and apps, and new uses or combinations of existing products. You can extend a UK patent application to the US, or you can file a direct US patent application. There are some differences and quirks in the different jurisdictions as to what is patentable in the UK versus the US. However, that's something that a patent attorney can guide you through, but ultimately you will get comparable protection in both jurisdictions, and indeed most jurisdictions around the world wherever you file the application. US patents are examined for novelty and inventive step. Next slide, please. Looking at design patents, these are protecting the shape or decoration of a product. It doesn't protect features of the design which are solely dictated by the product's function, and US design patents are only examined for novelty, so you don't have to overcome the additional hurdle of inventive step. I think because you don't have that additional hurdle, it's easier to get the design patents through in the US. However, what I would say is that the design protection isn't as robust as maybe patent protection in the US. So if you can, I would always favor filing a US patent, a utility patent. Next slide, please. One big question we get asked a lot is around freedom to operate. And the thing you've got to bear in mind is even if you file the patent application, it doesn't give you the right to do anything. What it does do is it gives you the right to stop others from exploiting or working the invention. So it's often advisable to undertake patent searches for third-party patents prior to a product launch, and this is particularly important in the US. If you do identify a problem patent, then you can design around them. It could be that you want to take a license to the patent, or even look to invalidate the patent. If it's still in the pending phase, then you can put a watch on the application to see if it issues, and if it does issue, what the claim scope is likely to be. I think if you're going to be talking to potential licensees or distributors, you want to avoid giving any particular warranties regarding the FTO position, simply because it could be very costly for you providing any warranties or indemnifications, and the licensee or the distributor should, and you'd like to think would actually do their own FTO analysis. And undertaking a freedom to operate search, even if it's a fairly high level search, is very important, because it would hopefully enable you to avoid treble damages. And this is where a US court could deem that you have performed willful infringement of a third-party patent. It's very difficult for a court to have that finding if you can show that you have done some searching prior to product launch. Next slide, please. Moving on to trademarks, these protect the brand or product name, and they can come in a number of guises. So it could be simply words, it could be simply letters, it could be numerals, it could be a logo, so a stylized logo. It could be the shape of the goods or their packaging. So if you think of the Coca-Cola bottle, that's actually a registered US trademark. It could be a sound, and that could be maybe a jingle from an advert, and it could be a color. So if you take maybe the particular blue color that Barclays use, they've protected that for banking services. Next slide, please. If you want to have protection for your trademark in the US, you will need to register your trademark in the US. And there are a number of options available to you. You can extend the UK trademark to the US, or you can file a direct US trademark application. I think the big difference between, say, patents and trademarks is, for patents, you're under a time constraint to extend the protection after you filed, for example, in the UK first. In the US, the test really is that you need to have an intention to use the trademark in the US. So if you've got a product or a service that you're running really nicely in the UK, I would say until you're ready to actually launch or start negotiating a contract in the US, I wouldn't file in the US until that point. Again, similar to patents, it's good to undertake a clearance search before launching in the US. You don't want to launch a product under a really great brand and spend a lot of money on the marketing, only to find out that in the US there's already a similar or identical trademark out there. And again, you want to limit any warranties offered if you intend to license a product or sell it through a distributor. And one thing to bear in mind is, especially if you're going to go down the licensing or distribution route, is that you should file the trademark in your own name, because what you don't want to have, the situation you don't want is for a distributor to acquire the goodwill in the trademark because they're the ones selling it in the US. You want to file it in your name and then license the trademark to them under the distribution agreement, because if you then wish to terminate the distribution agreement or license agreement, it then gives you the ability to then go to another party and keep on selling your goods under the same trademark. Next slide, please. That was a question and answers. I should just touch briefly on copyright, and it's just worth mentioning that in the UK and Europe it automatically subsists, but in the US you have to register it before the US Patent Office, and it really is around sort of written literary books and that sort of thing, but it's a one-off fee and just another layer of protection for your IP in the US. And as with the other speakers, more than happy to answer any questions, give some advice, have a follow-up phone call. Obviously, no charge for that. So without further ado, I'll hand you back to Frank. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you very much indeed. That was very good as always. Thank you very much. I forgot to mention the Biohub at Alderley Park, and of course you're in Leeds as well, on the other side of the Pennines.
It's fine, Simon. It's fine, Frank.
Strikes back, Simon. So next conversation will be with Carnegie Dukmajin, attorney at law with Fragman in London. He'll help us understand how to navigate US immigration weeds, if you like, or how to manage all through the shoals of that. Fragman and I, we worked together for a number of years, and they are a specialist visa and immigration house, legal firm in London, with an office also in Sheffield, if I'm not mistaken. But Carnegie, it's over to you, sir. Thank you very much.
That's right. Thanks, Frank. Well, if we could just move on to the next slide. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Carnegie Dukmajin. I am a U.S. immigration attorney based in London. I'm with Fragman. We are a global immigration law firm. We're dedicated to immigration, and that's pretty much all that we do. I've been with Fragman since 2020, although I've been practicing immigration law here in London since 2013. My practice is focused on helping British companies send their employees to the US, and in helping British entrepreneurs move to the US. Next slide. We don't have too much time, so I want to jump right into a few big picture points, and then we'll briefly discuss some of the more common visa categories that would be most relevant to you. As you well know, there are lots of issues to consider when planning to do business in or move to the US, and you've heard about a few of those today. From my perspective, oftentimes I've found that with clients that visas and immigration is one of the last things they think of, but really it should be one of the first. And here's 5 big picture reasons why. Number 1, the process will take a long time. It's going to take longer than you expect, both in terms of putting the application together and in terms of the very long government processing times. Number 2, how you set up a business legally can impact your eligibility for some of the main work visa categories, so it's important to get ahead of that at the beginning. Number 3, especially for E2 visas, it's important to have counsel early on to guide you on how to invest and what to spend your money on to maximize your eligibility for the E2 visa, which is one of the 2 main visa categories I'll be talking about a little bit later. Number 4, it's also good to have counsel early on to advise on the trips that you are very likely to make to the US on ESTA before you ever get your visa. And I'll talk about that in a bit as well. And finally, number 5, the US government has lots of discretion when it comes to adjudicating visa applications. Unlike a points-based system, it's wholly discretionary, which is why you need to prepare strong and substantive visa applications. So let's move on. One of the most, oh no, that was it. That's my whole slide. No need to move on in that way. So
you're leaving us very quickly, Carly, though. That was a very, very succinct presentation.
Well, you know, you gotta be on the 10 minutes. All right, so
you actually got 15, but don't.
All right. So one of the most common initial questions I get from clients is, what can I do on ESTA? For those that don't know, ESTA is the visa waiver program that allows British citizens and most Europeans to travel to the US for business or pleasure tourism for 90 days at a time. And this is usually the vehicle or the way that people go to the US as they're looking for an investment or, you know, looking to expand to the US. So what can you do on ESTA? So think of ESTA as allowing what I like to call low-level business activities, meetings with your business associates, negotiating a contract, attending a conference, undertaking independent research. It's that sort of thing. What you cannot do is engage in productive work. Productive work is an iffy term, and the guidance can sometimes be unclear on where that line is, but here's some examples. So you cannot start operating your business in the US on ESTA. You cannot start doing your usual job duties in the US, even if there's no US company yet, even if you're gonna get paid from abroad, so you can't do that. But what you can do is you can go to the US to investigate a potential investment, to check out office space, to incorporate your business, that sort of thing. We get into some gray areas when it comes to, you know, can I interview potential employees? Can I hire them? That can get a little tricky. Typically, that's going to be okay, though. The length and the frequency of these trips on ESTA can be a red flag for US border officials. So if you're going to the US too often or for too long, this is before you get your work visa, right? They might think you're already working in the US or that you're already living in the US, and you can be refused entry from the US. Or in a worst case scenario, the border officer can subject you to what's called expeditious removal. So that's when they, expeditiously remove you from the country, right? So it's a deportation on paper, and that comes with a 5-year ban. So it's really important to understand the limits of what you can and can't do on ESTA as you're planning your expansion to the US. So what are the main US visa options for an entrepreneur or an expanding business? The US has what I like to call an alphabet soup of visa categories. They're all named after letters and numbers. And the two main options are the following. So the E2 visa is the first one. It's probably the more relevant category. So the E2 visa is an investor visa based on a British citizen or British company making a substantial investment in the US. This will get you a 5-year visa for the investor and for any employees who share that investor's nationality. So this is a big plus of the E2 category. So not only does the owner, investor get a visa, but if that owner is British, then all other British employees can get a visa as well, provided they meet the minimal requirements. And they, they'll go through a streamlined process that I'll cover in a bit. So this is as opposed to the L1 visa, which doesn't have this facility. The E2 visa is based on a number of treaties that the US has with about 80 countries around the world, including the UK. So so British citizens do qualify for the E2 visa. So what are the main requirements? There are 4 main requirements for the E2 visa. Number 1, the US business must have at least 50% British ownership. So you look to the ultimate individual owners of a business to determine that business's nationality. This might not be an issue early on, particularly if it's, a single entrepreneur who's starting up a US business. That person is British and owns 100% of the business. But it can be an issue, well, if you're partnering up with non-British citizens, or in the future. So the business, the US business must always remain at least 50% British. So if in the future it's going to drop below 50%, such as with various rounds of venture capital funding, that's going to be a big problem, and it would essentially automatically invalidate the E2 visa. So ownership is a big, a big requirement. Number 2,
there needs to be a substantial investment in the US. Substantial isn't defined with a dollar figure, but generally you want to get to about $100,000. What does investment mean? Basically, it's any money that you spent that's related to starting up your US business. So, for example, legal and accounting costs, marketing and advertising costs, hardware, software for the US office, office space, your initial travel expenses to go check out the office space, right? So all those things. But the most important thing, though, to know is that just transferring money to a US bank account isn't enough. So you need to actually spend the money, and you know, you need to evidence that spending with, you know, invoices and receipts and statements and all of that. And all of that evidence goes into the visa application. So you can only apply for the visa after the investment has been made. And so that's sort of the biggest downside to this visa category, is that there's this element of risk. The third requirement is that there needs to be a real and operating business in the US. So you have to show that the business will be ready to open its doors essentially as soon as the visa is granted. So you have to invest, you have to spend enough money to get the business as close to up and running as you can, you know, before applying for the visa. So for example, you'll need to have office space and a US bank account. If possible, you want to have like a first employee on the ground, or maybe contracts or letters of intent with some potential clients in the US. And finally, number 4, marginality. So it cannot be a marginal business. The business in the US needs to be able to employ people other than yourself. So if this is an entrepreneur scenario, we need to make sure that it's not just, that business is not there just to support the entrepreneur and his or her family. You need to show that it's going to hire other people. And you need to show this as part of a detailed 5-year business plan with projections, and the embassy is going to review that business plan. So there are a lot of requirements and there's a bit of risk, but the good news is that if you go through these steps, generally it's going to get approved. There's generally a really high approval rate for these types of applications at the US Embassy in London, provided, of course, you meet the requirements. In terms of timing, like I was saying earlier, it can take a long time. Just government processing times is about 3 to 4 months from the time of application, and that doesn't include all the legwork that, you know, that comes before in terms of making the investment, opening the bank account, then preparing the application. So timing is, you know, a consideration upfront. The other category is the L1 visa category. So this is probably a less desirable option, but it's still there. So the L1 is the standard intercompany transfer. It's used to transfer people from a company's foreign office to the US office. You can use it to transfer a manager, an executive, the owner, or someone with specialized knowledge. The employee or owner, whoever it is, needs to have at least 1 year of experience with the company abroad. And the two companies, the foreign company and the US company, need to be commonly owned. And there always needs to remain a foreign company abroad. So if you know, that structure is important. The key for us is that you can use the L1 visa to send someone to the US to establish a new office, even if you don't already have a US office. So, and that's why it's an option for entrepreneurs or for business expansions. But there are a couple of downsides. Number 1, you only get a 1-year visa for this sort of L1 new office type visa, as opposed to up to 5 years for the E2. You can renew within that 1-year period, but you'll need to show quite a bit of growth within that first year and progress. And number 2, it's generally, the L1 generally requires a more onerous process. You're filing with USCIS, which is the US Immigration Service in the US, as opposed to the US Embassy in London. That means you're going to get, you know, more requests for evidence, more pushback from the government, and potentially, you know, higher chances of refusal. The pluses of the L1 is nationality is irrelevant, and you don't need to document investment. But like I said, it's only, new office is only limited to a year, and you need to do this process over and over for any further employees that you want to send, as opposed to the E2, which have that facility for other employees who are British. As for the E2, nationality is key. You need to invest as well, but you get the benefit of that 5-year longer visa. And like I said, you can register the business with the embassy, and you can send your employees through a streamlined process. So for both the L1 and the E2, you'll need to have a US entity in place, a legal entity, a company. You'll need to have a bank account in the US, and basically you need to be set up on the ground. There are other visa categories that can be relevant depending on your circumstances. So like the E1, that's sort of like the E2, but it looks at trade rather than investment. Typically the E2 is going to be the better option. There is sort of nationality specific visas for Australians, Chileans, Singaporeans. We can take a look at those if those are relevant. There's the O1 visa for people with extraordinary ability in their field. But the E2 and the L1 are usually going to be the starting point for an entrepreneur or an expanding business. And I'll conclude by saying that you can appreciate there's quite a bit of intricacy with these visa categories, and the best option is ultimately going to depend on your goals and your circumstances. But the most important takeaway for today is to get started early. And I'm also happy to answer any questions and help in any way that I can.
Thank you, Corin. I guess again, you demonstrate unequivocally the importance of talking and working with expertise and with experts like yourself, not trying to do shortcuts. I've seen people try and do shortcuts on their own kind of in a previous life, and it was ended in tears where I tried to make the applications online themselves.
Yeah, and that's sort of one of the something that we see, right, is people who do make applications on their own, doesn't go well, and then come to us to sort of try to help troubleshoot and fix the issue. But yeah.
Is it possible to just another quick question before we go to the general discussion? Is it possible to start with an L1 and switch to an E2? I mean, I should know the answer to that. Is it?
You can. So it's possible to do that.
It avoids the $100,000 or £100,000 commitment.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably some strategy questions there of why and when you would want to do that. It's possible, but I'd probably stick to one. Figure out which one you want to do, and then stick to that one throughout. But yeah, you can switch from either to the other.
Yes, right. Thank you.
Sure.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I think we're closing now. That's the Q&A session. We've got 10 minutes or so. I don't know if there's any. I'm looking in the chat box for some questions, but I can't see any at the moment. Perhaps I can fire I'm not sure if Steve could handle this one if you want. It's a cultural question, which is how do I sell and pitch in the US versus as a UK company? And this is again an interesting foible that people don't always necessarily appreciate. It's a different selling process, different business culture. Would you like to amplify that a bit, Steve?
Was that? Can you just repeat what you just said, Frank? The difference in sales culture.
Pitch in the US as a UK to a non-US UK company. What's the difference? How do you approach that?
I normally say to companies, leave all the fluffy stuff until you get to know the entity that you're dealing with. Initial sales pitches, initial business discussions with American companies should be about the business. It should be very straight. You should be very clear what your goals are. Leave the self-deprecation, that nice little British trait that we have. Leave it aside. It doesn't play well in America. So it really should be just straight up and down business. The fluffy stuff will come later. If business is going to ensue, then that's the time for, we can talk about the family history, 150 years of this and that, and you can do that over a few beers. But if you're sitting at the table for the first time, it's all about your business. Why should this company in America deal with you? What makes you special? And as I said, I'm not saying sort of pump up the ego, but leave the self-deprecation alone, and be careful on language. Again, make sure that you're using appropriate language. I think Tom's got some thoughts as well, Frank.
Yes.
Yeah, I have one thought, and that if you're talking to American partners, what you want to do is to show them how they're gonna make more money.
Exactly.
Doing business with you.
It's all about the business.
The key. If you can show them how they're going to make more money doing business with you, you'll go a long way.
I've got a question from Dave, actually. Let me just, while you're there, Tom, I think it's probably for you as well. So do I have to set up in the US to trade in the US?
The answer to that is no. You can do business directly in the US over the internet. There are tax aspects that need to be looked at, and the great folks at Avalara will be happy to talk to you about that. But you can certainly do business in the United States from the UK. A lot of our clients start with that, whether it be directly to end users or whether it be through distributors or agents, licensees, et cetera.
And another one, this I think is about our friends at Avalara, from Joanne Saggs. The question is, we are looking to sell e-training courses to the aerospace supply chain in America. Will we be liable for US sales tax? John, what do you have to, John, are you still there?
I think, hi, it's Kai here. So John and Mike have left the call. They've had to jump onto another event actually, but I can send that question to them, Joanne, and they can get back to you on that.
All right. Kai is the marketing manager, and I think we're both guilty of getting this together for the first time. So nice to
it's great to be involved. It was a great presentation, really fantastic event, really informative. I've learned a lot today as well.
Oh, well, that's very kind of you. Tom, I know you're there. It was always a nice red herring, which I always enjoy asking you this question. Is it true that everyone sues everybody all the time in the States? Makes work for you, Tom, I know that.
Well, sure. We try to get our clients into as much trouble as we can so we can get them out. Oh, what did I said something wrong there. Let me start over. No, very seldom are our clients sued. And it's not because of us, maybe a little bit, but not necessarily because of us. You know, we're a bit trigger happy. The thing to understand is that if you are sued in the United States, it's not the end of the world. We sue people in the United States often enough as part of negotiations. If I'm not happy with how negotiations are going, I might file a lawsuit just to get your attention. So many people take it personally, number one. Please don't do that. And number two, lawsuits are not about winning and losing, because if you write in as a white knight with your white suit and your white helmet and all that kind of stuff, you're in for a lot of legal fees and a tremendous amount of time and effort. The thing is that lawsuits are designed really to be settled in one form or another. 90% of all lawsuits in the United States do not go to final judgment. So it's important to have these types of things so that you understand how the US legal system works, but don't be particularly concerned about litigation in the United States. It's not a pastime of people.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Richard, are you okay to take a question?
Yeah, sure.
This is one sort of the list that we've tapped into before. Again, we've not talked about employment today, and we've got no one wearing a PEO hat that I used to wear. But how is hiring different in the US? This is always a very interesting chestnut. That perhaps I can just throw it out there because generally people might find it interesting to hear your perspective. How is hiring different in the States?
Yeah, very different, and depending on location too. But certainly the offer will be different. You need to factor in all the benefits, the medical cover that isn't available, that would be available to a UK person through National Health, et cetera, and determine how that works. That the employment is at will, so the more importantly or more relevantly, that it's the firing that is so much different. It's much easier to terminate than it is in the United Kingdom.
Absolutely. First, I can throw one out there just for everybody to comment as needs be. When should I look to raise money from a US venture capitalist? Is anyone who'd like to throw their hat in the ring and try and have a go at that? Tom? Steve?
When you've got your intellectual property in order and you've had a proof of concept so that the American venture capitalists have something to put their hands on, some form of valuation. Hopefully you've raised some money in the UK. Raising money in the US is supposed to be a lot easier than it is in the UK and elsewhere, and it may well be. I can't answer that specifically, but you've got to have your ducks in a row. and to some extent be prepared to flip the ownership of the technology to the US, but boy, are there tax consequences to that.
Yeah.
So, and Americans are now more willing to invest in foreign developed businesses rather than insisting on the US entity owning the interests.
Thanks, Tom.
Frank, can I just add one thing? Make sure that you've got your numbers right, because it's no point going in saying I need 20 million, because the question is going to be, what do you need 20 million for? And if you only need 7 and you're asking for 20, A, that's not a good start, and B, you're not going to get 20. You're going to have to fight to get 7. So you really, really need to be very, very precise about what your need is, what your spend is going to be, and the structure of your business. So I'm sort of with Tom on that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the clarification, Steve.
I'd just like to add one thing, Frank, which is just following on from what Tom said about the IP. Last week, I was in negotiations with a US investor regarding an international company, and the US attorneys were only concerned about the US patents. They didn't care how good the patents were around the rest of the world. So yeah, make sure your ducks are in order, and make sure that all the chain of titles in place, all the documentation's there. You don't want, you want it to make it easy for the investor to say yes. If you're having to scrabble around for documentation, it just puts them off.
Thanks, thank you, sir.
Frank, Richard, just got an add-on to the first question, the lady who asked about the sales pitch.
Yes.
Yeah, critical. During the sales pitch and at the end of the sales pitch, do not forget to ask for the sale. So many UK companies leave it open-ended, and the US guys will say, well, what was all that about? So ask for the sale.
It really touches on something Steve was saying earlier about don't be self-deprecating.
Exactly.
Anything else for the cause? We're running close to the anointed moment when we close. Any other sort of thoughts for the moment before we sort of say thank you to our hosts? What do you like?
Well, concerning employment, make sure you have contracts that confirm what Richard mentioned is the at-will relationship between you and the employee, and don't think you're going to avoid problems by having independent contractors, because we have the same regulations in the US as you have in the UK. What looks like a fish, smells like a fish, and swims like a fish is normally a fish. And if you're directing what the person is doing in the US, they're spending a lot of their time working for you. They're likely an employee, whether it's full-time or part-time. Have that in mind.
Point taken, Tom. Thank you. Thank you again. We're lovely to see you, Tom. We'll talk again a bit later today. I think we'll wrap it up. Is Corin, are you there?
I think Corin has had to shoot off to another meeting, I'm afraid, Frank.
Well, let me thank Richard, yourself. I'm really eternally grateful, and likewise to you, Graham, for putting this together with me today. It's very kind of you, mate.
No, that's wonderful. Thanks, Frank.
I think you're on mute, Graham. Can't hear you. It is. I got the thumbs up anyway, but thank you very much. No. Well, shall we close there? Richard, thank you for keeping it all together on the technical side as well. Graham?
Yeah, Frank, no problem.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. Well, thanks. I appreciate it. And thanks for all the support, Graham, and all the hard work, mate.
Okay, no problem. Very good. Great meeting.
Yeah, lovely to see you. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for your attendance, everybody. Have a nice afternoon, evening.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.